the driver who changed everything. Sarah Martinez had always been different from other soldiers in her unit. While most of her fellow soldiers dreamed of frontline combat roles, she found herself behind the wheel of a massive military SUV, driving supply runs through the dangerous mountain roads of Afghanistan. At 24 years old, she had joined the army not for glory or adventure, but because her family needed the steady income and benefits that military service provided. Her hometown of Mesa, Arizona, had been hit hard by the economic downturn. Her father lost his job at the local factory, and her mother worked 2 part-time jobs just to keep their small house. Sarah's younger brother needed surgery for a heart condition that insurance wouldn't fully cover. The military seemed like the only way to help her family while serving her country. The other soldiers in her unit often joked about her assignment. "Martinez, you're wasting your skills back there," Sergeant Thompson would say during their evening briefings. "You scored highest on the marksmanship tests, but here you are playing taxi driver." Sarah never complained. She understood that every role in the military was important, even if it didn't come with medals or recognition. Her daily routine was simple but dangerous. Every morning at 0500 hours, she would inspect her vehicle, a heavily armored SUV that had seen better days. The engine made strange noises, and the air conditioning had stopped working months ago, but it was reliable enough to get the job done. She would load supplies, medical equipment, and sometimes personnel, then drive the winding mountain roads to various outposts scattered across the region. The roads were treacherous, not just because of the terrain, but because of the constant threat of enemy activity. The Taliban controlled much of the surrounding area, and convoy attacks were common. Sarah had been through 3 roadside bomb incidents in her 6 months of deployment, each one leaving her more cautious and alert than before. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the road ahead, noticing when something looked out of place. Her commanding officer, Colonel Williams, had begun to notice her exceptional awareness. During their weekly briefings, Sarah would provide detailed reports about suspicious activities she had observed during her runs. She had a photographic memory for faces and could remember exactly where she had seen certain individuals days or even weeks later. Her intelligence reports had already helped prevent 2 major attacks on their base. The other drivers in the motor pool respected Sarah's skills, even if they didn't always understand her quiet demeanor. She didn't drink with them after duty or join their card games. Instead, she spent her free time writing letters to her family, reading military strategy books, and practicing her marksmanship at the base range. The range master, Corporal Davis, had never seen anyone shoot with such precision under pressure. Sarah's SUV had become her mobile command center. She had modified the interior with additional mirrors to eliminate blind spots, installed extra communication equipment, and even created a small weapons cache that was easily accessible but hidden from casual view. Her passengers often commented on how organized and prepared she seemed, though few realized the extent of her preparations. The relationship with her regular passengers had evolved over the months. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the base medic who frequently rode with Sarah to remote medical stations, had become something of a friend. During their long drives, they would discuss everything from military strategy to life back home. Dr. Walsh was one of the few people who knew about Sarah's family situation and understood why she had chosen such a seemingly mundane assignment. Local interpreters and Afghan military personnel also preferred riding with Sarah over other drivers. They had learned to trust her instincts and appreciated her respectful treatment of their culture. Ahmad, a young interpreter who worked with the American forces, often rode with Sarah to meetings with village elders. He had taught her basic phrases in his language, and she had helped him improve his English during their travels. The base commander had recently been considering Sarah for a commendation based on her service record, but she had declined the nomination. She felt that she was just doing her job and didn't need recognition for it. This humility had actually increased the respect her fellow soldiers had for her, though many wondered if she understood her own capabilities. As winter approached, the security situation in their area had been deteriorating. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy forces were planning something significant, possibly targeting the main supply routes that Sarah traveled daily. The threat level had been raised, and additional security measures had been implemented for all convoy operations. Sarah had noticed changes in the local population during her recent runs. Villages that had once been welcoming now seemed tense and suspicious. Children who used to wave at her SUV now watched from a distance. Market vendors who had previously smiled and nodded when she passed now looked away. Her detailed reports about these observations had been forwarded to higher command, but no specific actions had been taken yet. The evening before everything changed, Sarah had been checking her vehicle as usual when she noticed something that made her pause. There were fresh tire tracks near the motor pool that didn't match any of their vehicles. They were wide, suggesting a heavy truck, and the tread pattern was unusual. She made a note in her daily report and increased her already heightened state of alertness. Her last conversation with her family had been 3 days earlier. Her mother had sounded worried, as she always did, but there had been good news, too. Her brother's surgery had been successful, and he was recovering well. Her father had found part-time work at a hardware store. These small victories made Sarah's deployment feel worthwhile, even during the most challenging days. Sleep came fitfully that night. Sarah found herself thinking about the changing patterns she had observed, the unusual tire tracks, and the general feeling of unease that had been building over the past week. Her instincts, honed by months of dangerous driving and careful observation, were telling her that something was about to happen. She just didn't know what, when, or how severe it would be. As she lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the familiar sounds of the base settling into night mode, Sarah reviewed her emergency procedures one more time in her mind. She thought about escape routes, defensive positions, and contingency plans. It was a habit that had served her well in previous emergencies, though she hoped she wouldn't need to use any of those plans in the near future. When everything changed, the morning of October 15th started like any other. Sarah completed her vehicle inspection at dawn, noting that the strange tire tracks from the previous evening had been covered by fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Her mission that day was to transport medical supplies and 2 personnel to Forward Operating Base Echo, a small outpost about 40 miles northeast through the mountain passes. Her passengers were Dr. Walsh and Lieutenant Morrison, a communications specialist who needed to upgrade the radio equipment at the remote base. Both were experienced travelers who understood the risks of mountain driving in hostile territory. They had worked with Sarah before and trusted her completely, which made the usually tense journey more bearable for everyone involved. The first 20 miles passed without incident. Sarah maintained constant radio contact with base operations, reporting their position every 10 minutes as required by protocol. The weather was clear but cold, and the mountain roads were icy in several sections. Her modified SUV handled the conditions well, and they were making good time despite the challenging terrain. It was at mile marker 23 that Sarah first noticed something wrong. The road ahead curved around a large boulder formation, and she could see black smoke rising from beyond the curve. Her training kicked in immediately. She slowed the vehicle and reached for her radio to report the observation. But before she could speak, the radio crackled with panicked voices from multiple units. Base operations, this is Convoy Alpha 7. We are under heavy attack at Checkpoint Delta. Multiple casualties. Requesting immediate support. The voice was strained and punctuated by the sound of gunfire in the background. Sarah recognized the voice as Sergeant Patterson, who had left the base 30 minutes before her own departure. Dr. Walsh leaned forward from the back seat. "Sarah, that's the convoy that was supposed to reach Echo before us. They're in trouble." Lieutenant Morrison was already trying to establish communication with the convoy, but his portable radio couldn't reach them from their current position. The mountain terrain created too many dead zones for reliable long-range communication. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of turning back to base as protocol demanded, she continued toward the smoke. "We can't leave them," she told her passengers. "There might be wounded soldiers who need immediate medical attention." Dr. Walsh immediately understood and began preparing her medical equipment. Lieutenant Morrison checked his sidearm and extra ammunition. As they approached the curve, Sarah could hear the distinct sound of automatic weapons fire echoing off the canyon walls. She stopped the SUV about 200 meters from the curve and grabbed her binoculars. What she saw through the lenses made her blood run cold. The convoy had been ambushed in a narrow section of road with high rock walls on both sides. 2 vehicles were burning, and she could see soldiers pinned down behind the wreckage. The enemy had chosen their position perfectly. They occupied high ground on both sides of the road, with clear fields of fire down into the kill zone where the convoy was trapped. Sarah counted at least 15 muzzle flashes from different positions, indicating a significant enemy force. The trapped soldiers were outnumbered and had no escape routes available. Base operations. This is Martinez reporting from grid reference 437.892. Convoy Alpha 7 is under attack by estimated 15 to 20 enemy combatants. Enemy holds high ground positions. Convoy vehicles destroyed, multiple casualties visible, requesting immediate air support and medical evacuation. Sarah's voice was calm and professional despite the chaos she was witnessing. The response from base was immediate, but not encouraging. Martinez, this is base operations. Air support is 20 minutes out. Medical evacuation cannot proceed until area is secure. You are ordered to maintain position and provide reconnaissance only. Do not, repeat, do not engage enemy forces. Sarah understood the order, but she also understood that 20 minutes might be too long for the wounded soldiers below. Through her binoculars, she could see Dr. Thompson from the base medical unit crawling between wounded soldiers, trying to provide aid, while bullets sparked off the rocks around him. Several soldiers were motionless, and others were clearly suffering from serious injuries. She turned to her passengers. "I'm going to help them." Dr. Walsh nodded immediately. "I can treat the wounded if we can get to them." Lieutenant Morrison was studying the tactical situation through his own binoculars. "Sarah, there are too many of them in too good positions. We'll just become additional casualties." But Sarah had noticed something that the others hadn't. The enemy positions were concentrated on the high ground directly overlooking the ambush site, but there was a narrow ravine that ran parallel to the road on the eastern side. If she could use that ravine for cover, she might be able to reach a position where she could engage the enemy from their flank. "Give me 5 minutes to reposition," she told her passengers. "When I start firing, drive the SUV down to the convoy and start treating wounded. The enemy will be focused on my position." It was a risky plan that depended on her ability to create enough chaos to give the rescue operation a chance to succeed. Sarah grabbed her rifle, extra ammunition, and a portable radio. She also took 2 fragmentation grenades from the SUV's emergency kit. Her plan was simple but dangerous. Use the ravine to reach a flanking position, then create maximum disruption among the enemy forces while her passengers attempted to rescue the wounded convoy members. The ravine was about a quarter-mile long and offered good concealment from the enemy positions. Sarah moved quickly but carefully, using her knowledge of mountain terrain to avoid loose rocks that might create noise. The sound of gunfire continued from the ambush site, which meant that some convoy members were still alive and fighting. As she moved through the ravine, Sarah's mind was calculating distances, angles, and timing. She had memorized the positions of the enemy muzzle flashes and was planning her sequence of targets. Her marksmanship training had prepared her for long-range precision shooting, but this situation would require rapid engagement of multiple targets under combat stress. The ravine ended at a rock outcropping that was about 300 meters from the nearest enemy position and elevated enough to provide clear lines of sight to most of their firing positions. Sarah checked her weapon, adjusted her scope, and prepared for what she knew would be the most important shooting of her life. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighters clearly for the first time. They were well-equipped and disciplined, maintaining good fire discipline and communication between positions. This was not a random group of insurgents, but a well-trained unit that had planned this ambush carefully. Taking them on alone would require every skill she had developed during her military training. Sarah keyed her radio one last time before beginning her attack. "Dr. Walsh, Lieutenant Morrison, I'm in position. When the shooting starts up here, move fast. You'll have maybe 10 minutes before they reorganize." She took a deep breath, acquired her first target, and prepared to change from driver to warrior in an instant. The hour that made a hero. Sarah's first shot rang out across the mountain valley at exactly 08:47 hours. The enemy fighter she had targeted dropped instantly, his weapon clattering down the rocky slope. The effect on the enemy formation was immediate and dramatic. Shouts erupted from their positions as they tried to locate this new threat that had appeared on their flank. She moved quickly to her second target, a machine gunner who had been keeping the convoy pinned down with sustained fire. Her shot struck him center mass, and the heavy machine gun fell silent. Below, in the ambush zone, she could hear American voices shouting as the convoy members realized that someone was engaging the enemy from a different direction. The enemy forces were well trained, and they began to adapt to the new threat within seconds. Several fighters turned their weapons toward Sarah's position, sending bullets ricocheting off the rocks around her. She had anticipated this response and was already moving to a secondary position about 50 meters away when the return fire began. From her new location, Sarah could see that her attack had created the opening her passengers needed. Dr. Walsh and Lieutenant Morrison were driving the SUV down toward the convoy at high speed, using the distraction to reach the wounded soldiers. Sarah continued her methodical engagement of enemy positions, switching targets rapidly to maintain maximum pressure on their formation. Her third and fourth shots eliminated 2 more enemy fighters who were trying to reorganize their defense. Sarah had trained extensively in rapid precision shooting, but she had never imagined using those skills in a situation like this. Each shot had to count because she had limited ammunition and no backup support. Every miss would give the enemy more time to locate and neutralize her position. The enemy commander was clearly experienced in mountain warfare. Instead of panicking under the unexpected flank attack, he began repositioning his forces to deal with this new threat while maintaining pressure on the original convoy. Sarah watched through her scope as enemy fighters began moving in coordinated teams toward her general area. She realized that her original position was about to be overrun and made the decision to abandon her elevated advantage for greater mobility. Sarah moved deeper into the ravine system, using her knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of the enemy search teams. This decision would prove crucial in the next phase of the battle. From the ravine, Sarah could hear Dr. Walsh's voice on the radio providing medical updates as she worked on the wounded convoy members. "Martinez, we have 6 wounded, 3 critical. I need 15 more minutes to stabilize them for transport," Lieutenant Morrison added. "Enemy forces are trying to flank your position from the north. I count 8 fighters moving toward the ravine." Sarah acknowledged the report and began what would become a deadly game of cat and mouse through the rocky terrain. She used her intimate knowledge of mountain environments, gained during months of driving these roads, to stay ahead of the pursuing enemy forces while continuing to engage targets of opportunity. Her 5th kill came when she surprised an enemy fighter who was moving too quickly through the rocks. The man had been focused on reaching her last known position and failed to watch for threats from below. Sarah's shot caught him as he silhouetted himself against the sky, and he tumbled down the rocky slope. The pursuing enemy forces were getting closer, but Sarah had noticed something that gave her hope. The sustained gunfire from her position had attracted attention from beyond the immediate battle area. She could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors growing louder, indicating that the promised air support was approaching ahead of schedule. Sarah keyed her radio to coordinate with the incoming support. Falcon 7, this is Martinez on the ground. Enemy forces are dispersed across grid references 437.890 through 437.895. Friendly forces are in the road at 437.892 and in the eastern ravine system. Request immediate close air support on marked enemy positions. The response was immediate. Martinez, this is Falcon 7. We have visual on your position. Marking enemy targets now. Keep your head down. The attack helicopters began their engagement run, and Sarah used the confusion created by their arrival to reposition once again. With air support engaging the main enemy force, Sarah was able to focus on the immediate threats in her area. 3 enemy fighters had managed to get close to her position during the helicopter attack, and they were now hunting her through the ravine system. She could hear their voices calling to each other in coordination as they attempted to box her in. Sarah's 6th and 7th kills came in rapid succession as she turned the hunters into the hunted. Using a narrow gap between large boulders, she waited until the first 2 fighters passed her hiding spot, then emerged behind them. Her shots were taken at close range and were immediately effective. The 3rd fighter heard the gunfire and spun toward her position, but Sarah was already moving to new cover. The battle was becoming more personal now. Sarah could see the faces of the enemy fighters clearly, could hear their breathing as they searched for her among the rocks. Her 8th kill came when an enemy fighter made the mistake of pursuing her too aggressively into terrain that favored the defender rather than the attacker. Above the ravine, the helicopter engagement was proving devastatingly effective against the enemy positions. Sarah could see secondary explosions as ammunition stockpiles were hit, and the organized enemy fire was becoming sporadic and desperate. But the fighters in the ravine with her were cut off from retreat and were fighting with the ferocity of cornered animals. Her 9th and 10th kills occurred during a brief but intense firefight when 2 enemy fighters attempted to rush her position simultaneously from different angles. Sarah's combat training took over completely. Time seemed to slow down as she engaged first one target, then pivoted to engage the second. Both shots found their marks, and the ravine fell silent, except for the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Sarah took a moment to assess her situation. She had been fighting continuously for nearly 30 minutes, had expended most of her ammunition, and was operating on pure adrenaline. But the immediate threat in her area had been neutralized, and she could hear Dr. Walsh on the radio reporting that the wounded convoy members were ready for evacuation. The final phase of the battle was unlike anything Sarah could have imagined when she woke up that morning. As she emerged from the ravine to coordinate with the evacuation helicopters, she discovered that the enemy force had been much larger than initially estimated. Intelligence reports would later confirm that she had engaged elements of a 32-person enemy unit that had been planning to attack the main American base. Her actions had not only saved the trapped convoy, but had also disrupted a major enemy operation that could have resulted in significant American casualties. The enemy fighters who had escaped the helicopter attack were captured over the following days, and interrogations revealed the full scope of their planned assault. Sarah's final 12 kills came during the evacuation phase, when remaining enemy fighters attempted to attack the medical helicopters. From her position near the landing zone, she provided overwatch fire that eliminated the last organized resistance in the area. Each shot was calculated and precise, protecting both the wounded soldiers and the helicopter crews who had come to evacuate them. When the shooting finally stopped, Sarah found herself standing among the rocks, where she had spent the most intense hour of her life. Dr. Walsh approached her with tears in her eyes. "Sarah, you saved all of us. Those soldiers would have died without what you did here." Lieutenant Morrison, who had coordinated communications throughout the battle, was already writing his after-action report and shaking his head in amazement. The helicopter flight back to base gave Sarah time to process what had happened. She had entered the day as a supply driver and was returning as someone who had single-handedly defeated a significant enemy force. But as she looked down at the wounded soldiers she had helped save, she realized that her actions had been driven not by a desire for heroism, but by the simple understanding that leaving fellow soldiers to die was not an option. Colonel Williams was waiting when the helicopters landed at base. As Sarah climbed out of the aircraft, still carrying her rifle and wearing gear stained with dust and gunpowder, she could see the entire base personnel gathered to watch her return. The story of her actions had already reached the base through radio communications, and word was spreading quickly through military channels. The official recognition would come later. Sarah Martinez would receive the Medal of Honor for her actions that day, becoming one of the youngest recipients in modern military history. But as she walked across the landing pad that afternoon, she was thinking not about medals or recognition, but about the letter she would write to her family that evening, telling them that she was safe and that the money for her brother's continued medical care was secure. The young woman who had joined the military to help her family had become something she never expected, a genuine American hero whose actions would be studied in military academies for generations to come. But Sarah Martinez would always remember herself simply as a driver who did what needed to be done when fellow soldiers needed help.